dear friend, and I hope you guys don't mind me bringing these individuals to you. Marcus Shingles is an executive at Bain. He's a leader in the digital innovation practice. He just recently served as the CEO of the X Prize Foundation. And as a partner and executive, Marcus has led the digital innovation practice at Deloitte Consulting. Before that, he started his career at Kellogg, but he has gone so deep and he's so passionate, and he has worked with 8 Abundance 360 members to really create an extraordinary spatial web experience for them, which you'll have a chance to experience with your headset a little bit, just a little bit. But first, Marcus, we're at an inflection point, my friend, and it's an incredible time. Please share with us what this all means, and welcome to Abundance 360. Turning the floor over to you.
Hi, everybody. Well, this is going to be exciting. 300 people in Oculus headsets going through a VR space hosted by 8 of your peers, your members from A360. So behind the scenes right now, there's a lot of activity going on because in some virtual world somewhere in the universe, you have your peers, other executives from A360 that I've worked with, had the pleasure to work with over the last 2 months to build some proof of concepts. So let's jump into this. I want to give some context here first. So, you know, when we say spatial web, another term you're going to hear is Web 3.0. And that's a big statement if you think about it, right? Especially if you look at the progression of the web from Web 1.0 to 2.0 to 3.0. So I would not treat this lightly, right? Just for full disclosure here, I don't represent a hardware or software company. So my goal is just to give you guys advice, because I work with a lot of companies actually implementing this to reduce their cost or improve their revenues or improve brand loyalty, consumer loyalty, et cetera. So I'm not here to position or sell you anything per se, so I'll keep it brutally honest, because there is some hype in this space and then there's some reality. The best way to separate hype from reality is to actually do proof of concepts. Get in there, roll up your sleeves, and experiment. And the real advantage we're going to have today is 8 A360 companies, your peers, have actually done this over the last 2 months, where we've actually built out spaces to see what's the hype, what's the reality, and can it be used in real pragmatic, practical use cases, real business use cases. So what I would share with you before we kind of, you know, in 30 minutes, we're all going to be getting into the headset. So let me just give you a little bit of context to level set everybody. You've heard Peter make the statement, you know, skating to where the puck is going. Actually, it's a Wayne Gretzky quote, but we've all heard that. We all definitely understand what that means. I use this term going from A to F. And, you know, as business executives, we really have to consider there are different steps we can take to get, you know, to improve our business. If we're paying attention to certain trends, we can actually skip a lot of these steps and just go from A to F. And sometimes that is more of a soundbite than reality. I think my assessment is that for spatial web, virtual reality, augmented reality, artificial intelligence, for this whole domain, it's almost fiduciarily irresponsible of you not to be paying attention to this space at this point as a corporate executive. This is definitely a space that will give you a blind spot and either become an opportunity for you to do a leapfrog or be a real risk for you. And I want to drive this home by giving you guys some of the data. You know, let's look at the empirical data of why the timing is now. I don't think we should have had this conversation a year ago. I don't even know if we should have had this conversation 6 months ago. There's really an inflection point happening right now, and I'm going to describe why. Okay, so to walk you through this, let's go on a little bit on the journey. If you think about earlier, you know, let's say 10 years ago, it really started, and this is pretty amazing story. I'm not going to go through it in detail because I know everybody's familiar with this, but it started with Palmer Luckey, a 19-year-old college dropout from USC, in his garage, working on this headset concept back in around 2010. He put it on Kickstarter. He raised $2.5 million in a few days to get some capital to actually build a prototype. He then built that prototype. He then talked to Mark Zuckerberg about it, and then a year later, Mark Zuckerberg acquired from the college dropout, the 19-year-old, for $2 billion. He acquired Oculus from this college dropout, right? And there you go. Palmer Luckey's on the cover of Time magazine back in 2015. Today, $300. That's what you guys have all acquired. That's the gift that A360 gave all of you. This is amazing technology. That is the computer. You don't have to buy it and then plug it into a computer. It is the computer now. And this is the dot matrix version, right? It's not the laser printer version that we're going to see in another year and a half, but it is definitely ready for prime time, as you guys will all experience. So, you know, I have an idea, linear versus exponential thinking. I now run a multi-billion-dollar company. I launched a trillion-dollar industry. So if you fast forward to up a little bit from this first step, which is an indicator, you then see what Eric Poulier was talking about, which is in 2012, there was $52 billion annually in 2012 happening with digital goods in a digital good economy within games. And this is something Eric talked about back in 2012. This is not going to stay stuck in games. This is going to come out into the real world, and it's not just going to be gamers. It's going to be, everybody's going to be using digital objects and augmented reality and start treating digital objects like real objects of value. So you start to see that trend. Another trend, you just start hearing the noise about spatial web, you know, and you're starting to see it being talked about. You're starting to see money in it. You're starting to see venture capitalists get involved. You're starting to see startups all over the world focused on this. You're seeing other technologies converge into spatial web. Keep moving forward, you get to where we are specifically now. We're talking about augmented reality, virtual reality, combining with artificial intelligence, all the things we heard about AI today in these digital avatars, new sensors that connect the digital world with the real world, and then blockchain. Blockchain is kind of a fancy kind of a term that's thrown a lot, but Eric Poulier really did some interesting work with blockchain and digital objects. He made it so, and I can't emphasize you guys to this enough because this gets lost on people. When you see a digital object, in augmented reality, it is a unique object. When you see it, it's the only one that exists in the world. Now think about that for a second. If I'm Walmart, if I'm the Kellogg company where I used to work, and I wanted to drop Tony the Tiger inside of a Walmart store in augmented reality and then tell people in the neighborhood, I only put 5 of these in the aisle, the first 5 that get to the store get it. I could do that. It's a rare, unique object. It's like a token. It's on a blockchain architecture. Pretty interesting technology. Completely changes the game when it comes to promotional and digital marketing. Here's the other kicker. If I'm the Kellogg company and I wanted to do that, I don't have to ask Walmart for permission. I can stick that digital object in the aisle of a Walmart store without their permission. I probably should ask because I'm a partner with them, but I don't need to. It's digital space. So you've got these trends. The other thing that you're starting to see is real companies getting real value. You know, these are quotes from executives at big companies talking about just in the last year, essentially, wow, spatial web and virtual reality, augmented reality, it's ready. It's ready for prime time. So you're starting to see real companies doing real work. You're starting to see real use cases, all types of use cases. You're going to see 8 of them today, all types. But this is everything from using it internally for your HR function, doing performance reviews, doing performance management, doing training, doing hiring, doing interviews, doing meetings, but you're also starting to see it become customer facing for customer loyalty, product design, customer engagement. So there's real use cases that are coming about, and you're going to see some examples. You're experiencing them yourself in just a few. You also have new, the technology itself is getting to a point where the hardware is now mass consumer adoption. Best example would be the Oculus. I mean, that really is a game changer. The fact that there's a $300 product that, you know, again, 6 years ago was a $2 billion acquisition. There's a $300 product that's out there, and you're going to see mass consumer adoption. Oculus can't even keep up with the demand at this point. So this is going to spike exponentially and go from that deceptive phase to the disruptive phase. Here's another thing that's creating this acceleration. COVID. I mean, you've got people that now are forced to wanting to be in these virtual reality, augmented reality spaces because we've got Zoom fatigue. People are all scrambling to figure out how to do education, how do I do teaching, how do I do learning, how do I visit my family, how do I go socialize with friends, how do I do my business, how do I meet with my colleagues, how do I design my products. That's forcing us all to get creative. And because of the Zoom fatigue, because of Corona, I personally have seen a huge adoption in the interest of virtual reality, augmented reality, as many of you can attest to. So you've really got to take that into consideration. That's going to accelerate things probably a decade ahead of where they would have been normally. And then some of the remaining things is you've got some new software that's coming out that's essentially free. Software that, you know, a few years ago, you'd have to get a technician, you'd have to get an IT department, you'd have to have a big budget, and you'd have to really do a big ERP implementation almost to use this stuff. Now it's basically free. You heard the CEO of Spatial, Anand, and the CEO of Tailspin, Kyle, were two of the guests that Peter had on earlier in the week. These are the top companies in this space. And the spatial software you get in later today, notice none of you had to pay a license fee for that software. I mean, they kind of have the Facebook model, right? Where you give it out for free and people use it, and then you find other ways to monetize it. So you have some amazing software that is now coming to play, that's been democratized. You also have some really important stats that are coming to play. I mentioned this a few days ago when I talked about education and learning using virtual reality. PricewaterhouseCoopers did an independent study, and it is being proven that in virtual reality, the training and learning capacity is exponentially greater than a classroom in person or on Zoom, of course. So you're actually starting to see some real benefits, meaning that this is not just a Band-Aid or a fix because of COVID. This is actually the preferred way to meet. So even post-COVID, this is sometimes you will prefer to be in a virtual reality space to have a meeting, even if we could physically be in the same room together. Why? Because we have superpowers. We can do things we can't do in real space. Some of the remaining things, and this is kind of where I think we're here, right at the spike. COVID accelerated things big time. The software's coming down, the $200, $300 headsets. Now where we're headed is, you've heard Mark Zuckerberg talk about 2021, he's coming out with his Facebook glasses for augmented reality. So now Facebook is doubling down on this. This is one of their biggest bets. They've made a huge promotion alliance with Ray-Ban. So you're going to get designer glasses, the ones that I'm wearing now, that you'll wear and that will give you fully immersive augmented reality or virtual reality. In addition, you've got, and you're going to see some exponential trends when you have two of the biggest players competing against each other. You've got now Apple with Tim Cook. Here's Tim Cook. My view, it's the next big thing and will pervade our entire lives. It will replace the iPhone. So it's estimated that in 2022 to 2023, you will not buy an iPhone. You'll buy those pair of glasses in the top right corner. You'll buy Apple's product, which is the augmented reality iPhone for your face. And he's going to be competing with Facebook and Google and Microsoft. So it's like follow the money. When you see all this money go towards a trend to make it a consumer product, the mass adoption is going to go sky high. You have another trend that Peter talks about often, which is connectivity. You heard Starlink talk earlier this week, right? About Elon Musk giving satellite access in the internet to everybody. 60% people are now using the internet, and we're about to add 4 billion more people onto the internet in the next few years. Think about that convergence. So everybody will have an inexpensive hardware to be able to view their world, cheaper than a computer, cheaper than a phone, in order to view the web now everywhere they look, overlaid on everything they're looking at. That's just how people are going to experience the world. Some of the other things that you see coming are Facebook has announced this partnership with this company that will actually give you tactile feedback. It uses these energy waves to actually create this acoustic feedback. So when you touch things, it feels like you're actually touching something. So you're getting tactile feedback. You also have, of course, a lot of the technologies advancing where you're going to go from these LiDARs that you currently have on your iPhone. Can you imagine where the LiDAR will be that's out today on the iPhone, what it will look like in 3 or 4 years? You'll be able to scan anything and bring it into a digital environment. And then, of course, A360 members, you recall that Mojo Vision was actually at A360 last January, over a year ago. Peter and team had Mojo Vision. That's the contact lens. So think about where that product will be and the form factor that it will be. And then lastly, as we just discussing, artificial intelligence. Think about where AI will be combined with now virtual reality, augmented reality. So, the point is, this is the data. It's very, very obvious to predict this, where things are going. It's very, very apparent to me that you should start now, because in a matter of years, you're going to see this really hit that inflection point where there's mass adoption. So with that said, here's the fun part. 8 brave souls from A360, your peers here, the executives from these pioneering organizations, back a few months ago, when Peter and I introduced this concept and talked about this, we asked if anybody from the A360 community who actually wanted to do a proof of concept with me, that we'd put together and develop this whole strategy and actually put a working prototype together around some business use cases to experiment. And any of the companies that wanted to do that, and we had to limit it to 8. We had many of you that were excited about doing. We limited to these top 8, and these 8 are now going to demo for you what they worked on over the last couple of months for starting here in a few moments, where you're going to be able to see in virtual reality. If you don't have your headset, you're going to watch it on Zoom, because we're going to live stream from VR on Zoom. But essentially, if you're wondering, like, what do I got to do a process like this? It's not like you just go in there and start throwing shiny objects everywhere and come up with something. You've got to think methodically, just like you do with every business strategy, about how do I pragmatically use this in my business, decrease cost, increase revenue, generate new revenue streams, brand myself as an innovator, and get first mover advantage and get to market. And so that's where we are. Peter and I spoke about this back in November. I was actually doing a board meeting with a Fortune 100 company with the CEO and the entire executive team for 2 hours in virtual reality. And Peter was over and we were talking about this, and he's like, we should do this as a 4th day to Abundance 360. And fast forward, and here we are. You've all got Oculus headsets. If you don't have the Oculus headset, you're going to have some ways to participate. What we did, just to put this in strategic context, is I can't emphasize enough, you can't treat this as a gimmick. You can't write this off as a gimmick, like something cool with some cool tech. You got to treat it more seriously. One of the things I worked with these 8 companies on is a strategy of all the capabilities that you have to think about if you're really going to be cohesive and comprehensive when you think about, how do I introduce spatial web for business benefit to my model? And so, give you an example, one of the things that was the most fun of the exercise we did, 2 of my colleagues wrote this cover story for Harvard Business Review, and I worked with them at Deloitte. This is, the notion that where can this apply in your core business with your current products and your current customers? Is there some adjacent plays you can introduce? But when you talk about this, you're really talking about some new transformational plays. So literally adding brand new revenue streams into your business. That was one of the exercises we did, was not only do you apply this to your core business, but how can you dominate this in your industry where you can create another form of revenue? For example, one client I'm working with is in the beer business, okay? It's clear to me that if a lot of their revenue comes from this one demographic going up to watch sports at the pub, that's where a lot of their revenue comes from. They're really a sports bar beer brand. So they're dependent on people going up to a bar to drink their product during a big Super Bowl or during a big game globally. And if you think about that, the risk to them is they get disintermediated by virtual reality, because me and my mates, first, if there's COVID, I'm not going up to the pub. But even without COVID, I have the option of calling up my mates and saying, hey, why don't we all meet in my man cave where we actually watch the game on the 50-yard line, or from the point of view of the quarterback, because that's what's happening. And so people will opt out of going up to a bar to watch a game because I can watch it with my global friends in a much more conducive environment. So the question is, if you're in the beer business, how do you get it, rather than get disintermediated by that, maybe you should go start talking to Oculus about building a digital waiter that enters your man cave or your people cave and actually takes a beer order and then gets Uber to send a 6-pack to you and your friends. So your product is not disintermediated from that whole equation because people are no longer going up to the local pub. I mean, that's the type of thinking that you have to start thinking about now. So we focused on a few different areas of spatial web technology. That's virtual reality. We described that. Augmented reality. We described the digital objects that you just heard Eric discuss, and spatial web. So you really got to look at it comprehensively. What I'd like to do now is, in a minute, I'm going to show you a little video that has a preview of the 8 rooms that you're about to experience, of the 4 rotations.
Marcus, let me just.
Yeah, don't let this. I want everyone to pause for a second and think about this. Okay. To create these spaces, it actually is more of a creative experience than a technical experience.
Yes.
So what that means is,
yes,
in 1992, we'd have to go learn HTML to create these spaces. To create these spaces, it's a creative expression. It's not technical. You go in and decorate the room the way you want. So we've just democratized coding to this new virtual way of coding, to where, if you wanted to create a classroom to teach someone, you could get in there and do that as easy as putting a PowerPoint deck together. You don't have to call a technical team to come in and code a lot of stuff for you. And that's why you see a lot of the young people I had in the rooms that I'm mentoring and training. They're this next generation of creators. And to create, not everyone is going to be a coder. Not everyone's going to be a coder. So that's what I think is one of the most powerful things about this technology is it's going to make the expression, the digital expression that we all try to make, that we're dependent on developers to build for us. You don't need that anymore. You get in there and you decorate a room with the same skill sets it takes to decorate a room in real life, but you even have more superpowers. So it's kind of interesting if you think about it, right? One real comment. Yeah, one real comment, Peter, because I think everyone will find this interesting. One of the things that Spatial is working on, and you'll see, and by the way, there's other software. Spatial is one of the key softwares. There's other VR softwares. It's just the one that we feel is the best resolution of the avatar, so it feels more personable, okay? One thing that is a capability that you're going to see this technology add, if you think about where this type of software is going, is you'll be able to record that experience. You guys will be able to have a meeting, and someone will miss the meeting. But just like you can watch a Zoom meeting on a recording after the fact, you can have an employee come back and attend a meeting in Spatial afterwards, as if the avatars were all happening live. So think about that. You could actually record a session and then people can go experience it like a live session, but they're actually, everybody in there that's moving around is a digital recording at that point. But it gives you an idea of where this technology is going as well.
Super cool. Eric Poulier, do you want to jump into the conversation?
Absolutely. I found the comments really encouraging. Obviously, there's some scalability things hitting the servers today, but it's nice to see the light bulbs going up over people's heads about the difference between projecting a video on a 2D surface and being in a space where the contextual elements change the way you perceive togetherness. So I really do like the comments that are coming in because people are getting it.
Eric?
So it's very simple. It goes to the evangelism you bring around the notion of specialization is that it's not specialized. It's not for a niche community. When we were first evangelizing the web, people gave us the concept or understood the concept of its potential ubiquity, but they said, oh, I see why Toyota would have a website or why Amex would have a website. Why do I need one? I have TV commercials, I have brochures. What's very clear in this evolution, in our vision, just to put it simply, is every single interaction on the internet has a come inside button instead of surf the surface. And it doesn't matter what device you use, if it's a phone, if it's a laptop, if it's an Oculus, if it's AR goggles, you'll come in and that space will dissolve the boundaries between worlds and just let you commune in the most important way possible with each other.
Yeah, I think one of the points that you and I have had, and please, everybody.
I should say one thing about Philip Rosedale, because we do stand on the shoulders of giants when we do these things. And Philip is not only a pioneer of Second Life, but he built the sound technology that is at the core of spatialweb.net. Our sound technology is extraordinary, but because it's Philip's sound technology. And what he's done is nothing short of remarkable.
I've lost my screen down here, so tell me who's next on.
Share with you. And I really apologize we couldn't go through all the rotations right now because the diversity is what's important. One of the spaces was Jonathan Vischer, who's at Holloway Wealth Management. He doesn't have a product, so he's not bringing someone in the space to see a product per se, but he's offering advice around financial wealth management. My first inclination was, how relevant is this going to be for him when I started working with him? I actually think it's probably one of the best use cases, and let me explain why, and it alludes to the health thing too. You don't have any handcuffs on as far as scarcity. It truly is abundance. You know, Peter's examples of the Kodak camera, and now you go to abundance of film. Think about this for a second. You can create 50 custom rooms. You can, rather than having a doctor's office where every patient comes to my office and I have to pull out the charts for you as a patient, or a wealth management advisor, you come to my office and I have your taxes and your portfolio and your 401k. Instead, I can flip it and I can create you your own office or your own doctor's room. So you as a patient have your standard room that you always use and you're always in virtual reality. All your x-rays are there, all your medical records. How hard is it for us all to keep track of all that stuff? Because it's all, so as a doctor,
hard.
As a doctor or a wealth management advisor or what have you, I could create a private space for every client, for every patient. And the incremental cost of creating a new space is basically zero. You're in a digital world, so you have unlimited real estate.
Please roll this clip.
Oh, that's
that little
right.
mark with the A and then the ring around it.
At.
See, that's what I said. Mm-hmm. Kay said she thought it was about.
Yeah. Oh.
but I'd never heard it.
Around
I'd never
or
heard it
about.
said. I'd always
That's
seen the
right.
mark, but never heard
Yeah.
it said. And then it sounded stupid when I said it. Violence at NBC.
Yeah, I heard around
big
or
fight
about.
up in the lunchroom the other
See,
week.
there it is. Violence at NBC, GE com. I mean,
Well, Allison should know.
what
do you
is
say about
internet
Allison?
anyway?
Internet is that
Massive computer
right,
network.
the one that's becoming really big now.
What do you mean? That's big. How does one? What do you write to it like mail?
No, a lot of people use it and communicate. I guess they can communicate with NBC writers and producers. Allison, can you explain what internet is?
Right.
And others can access it.
Right.
And it's getting bigger and bigger all the time.
It
Just
came in
great.
really handy during the quake. A lot of people, that's how they were communicating out to tell family and loved ones they were okay because all the phone lines were down.
I was telling Katie, and I've
But
been
you don't
talking.
need that. You don't need a phone line to operate internet.
No.
Quickly on that comment about healthcare, I just wanted to share two things. We're experimenting now with what you might think of as the next generation of Peloton. When you take your avatar and your representation of yourself in the world and you're moving about, that motion doesn't have to be the exercise of your little fingers. It could be the exercise of you balancing on something that works your core, or pedaling something, or flying with your arms. So imagine flying through the skies together while you're flapping your arms, and all your heart rate and your various elements that would contribute to your health are all being monitored. So there's very interesting connections to your body, to the spatial web. And then the next piece I just want to mention is, like, we're also experimenting with things like pharmacist interactions, where you have a much more deeper emotional connection to the person talking to you. Customer service is never going to be the same when you can share remote togetherness in a way that leaves you satisfied that you had a human connection.
And
The other thing that's interesting for Thomas and team, Peter, is once they built this virtual space of this complex they have in Texas, I believe, right? A digital twin of this whole complex. We started to realize from being in the space that one of the business use cases they could get into is if I was a resident in that apartment complex and I had COVID and I couldn't meet the 300 neighbors I have in the building, the homeowners association could give everybody a headset and people could meet in virtual world to actually get to know who their neighbors are, even if there wasn't a COVID, right? And what that leads you to think is if that took off, Thomas and the Quex team are now making social networking software. They're getting in the social, it's a niche play. It's a Facebook niche play. It's specifically for people in an apartment complex. But I told them, I said, that will take off. That will be a thing. And Quex, what a great thing to add to their product portfolio. So I call these all second engine areas of growth. And, that's one of the things I work with all these teams on is how do we use it in your core business, but also how do we create brand new businesses for you because you're the pioneer in your industry. So again, I'm happy to go ahead.
we go on.
I just want to, again, reemphasize that what we're seeing is obviously the tip of the iceberg, because it is very reminiscent of the internet in the early stages, where people's eyes open up and say, it's not just that the other guy can use this. It applies to everything where you have a connection to somebody else, because that connection, that's what it's all about. When you're selling, when you're experiencing, when you're collaborating, it's a human to human thing. And this makes that human to human connection feel more real, but you do end up with superpowers that you don't have even if you're there physically.
Hey, Peter.
Kevin, one thing with don't underestimate the power of the objects. We're talking a lot about how cool it is to feel like you're somewhere. Well, that shock and awe will give way pretty quickly and become a gimmick if you don't make it practical. And the practical parts of that are, how do you follow up? How do you continue when you're not in spatial web? And the answer to that is the glue. The objects are the glue, taking something out of there that you have on your phone that you can deal with later, manipulate, look at your leisure, bring it back in. That allows you to create an ongoing relationship, an ongoing experience, not just for the moment that you happen to be in a world.
Yeah, this is
One of the things I'll highlight for everybody here is the notion of, in situations like this, the whole notion of first mover advantage. So let me explain. I guarantee you guys in A360, in a year's time, your industry will be talking about this. And when you walk into a session with your client or your customer or your partner and say you have this capability in VR, they're going to probably roll their eyes at you and say, well, who doesn't? So my recommendation right now is your window of opportunity. This is the benefit of being part of the A360 community. Eric Poulier, with his digital objects that I've helped, we've actually worked on some clients together. Not a lot of companies know about this yet, but everyone's starting to get into it. So my point is this: your window of opportunity is probably the next 6 months to capture the brain share and build your brand equity about being an innovator in your industry. Because what you want to do is you want to start documenting that you have this capability as soon as you can. So all the proof of concepts we just did, they can put these on their websites. They can put videos out there, because when you walk in a year later and someone rolls their eyes and says, who's not doing this? These guys are going to be able to say, I'm the pioneer. I started it. Look back at January 2021 on the YouTube video. We started this trend in the industry. So I'd recommend that for all of you, that you have this one window of opportunity to get a legitimate first mover advantage within your market.
Hey there. I was in the Quext demo room. That was pretty cool. And I'm in the property restoration world. So when buildings get damaged from disasters, floods, fires, things like that. And geospatial technology, 3D scans, things like that is becoming quite big in our space. And I'm kind of curious because I see some really big use cases where we can bring those physical scans into a VR environment and then add some additional types of functionalities and problem solving things. So I was kind of curious if that's a capability or something that will come in the near term future.
Yeah, I wonder about if everybody's got a 3D virtual representation of their properties, and if there's damage, you can then overlay the damage and then decide, how do you want to restore it? Do you want to restore it back the way it was, or do you want to change it now? And then the adjacency is to go from there to sort of the redesign and rebuild area there. Anything you want to add,
Even
Eric
simply,
or Marcus?
Yeah.
Yeah, to show before and after versions of the properties is something you could get up and running in a couple of weeks and have some really lifelike digital twins to show the before and afters. I mean, again, the thing that's powerful about this to me is, I've been in the tech field a long time, and I remember back in the 90s and 2000s, if you wanted to do something transformational in your business, you had to call up SAP and do a big ERP implementation that was going to cost tens of millions of dollars and take you 2 years, right? Think about this now. These A360 teams, and I hear the sites are up, so you guys will be able to go into the open houses later. Just think to yourself, 2 months ago, these didn't exist. There wasn't a strategy for it. We didn't know what it was. There was no capability. And then all of a sudden, within 2 months, these are full-fledged business operations that are comparable to doing a big ERP implementation a decade or two ago. So, there's no fallacy here like this is some big technical lift or some big expensive lift to do this. That's the thing that makes the inflection point right now.
Let's go to Michael Potts next. Michael.
Hello, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, well,
Yes.
I just want to say, Peter and Marcus, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to help create these spaces. It was a lot of fun, and I've been working with the VR technology for 25 years. And I have to say, if you've watched this technology evolve over the last quarter of a century, you won't believe how much advance has happened in the last few years. And Marcus, you and I can agree with this. The last 4 or 5 months have really just seen a massive, quick uptick on this technology and what you can do. And I just want to say one last thing. I think this really, the Oculus Quest 2 and the 3 and the 4, they're really the communication tools of the future. I send them off to my family, to my clients. I make my presentations a lot of times these days are directly in virtual reality, not Zoom, but in virtual reality. So once you start to shift your mindset to using virtual reality as a tool for communication, there's really, the sky's the limit.
An example that Senegence team did. So Ben and Joni from the Senegence team, some of you went into their space, the Bora Bora space. I mean, something really interesting that was fun working with them is they have 200,000 to 300,000 distributors in their consumer products and skincare distribution model, right, across the world. So part of their success as a business, besides the products that they have, is effectively training 200,000 to 300,000 people. And so they invest a lot of money to have these big conferences where they bring everybody together and they actually try to do these trainings and stuff. And what they started to realize with COVID, they're not doing that, but also they can take some of the top 1% of their salespeople and create a training classroom tailored for that person. And that person can then train hundreds of thousands of people at once and even create a new revenue stream for that trainer and for the Senegent's business. Because you could charge people $5 to go get an expert training by one of the sales distributors who's the top of the sales organization.
Yep. Thoughts, please.
There's nothing more important than what was just said. I think that was Jason English. Really, really insightful comment, because what you have to remember is that there's no way to scale this type of business by just hiring a lot of people and doing it yourself. You have to open it up. You have to have a community building things that can share with one another. And this notion of these digital assets, that there's already a massive skill set out there to build them. But now you can put them on blockchain, and now you can put them in spatial web, and now you can have them interact with one another and move between worlds. The key to this is a marketplace. A marketplace, you know, you said it yourself, Peter, it's this interface moment when people can actually make money on a new technology is what catapults it into becoming quote unquote real or ubiquitous. That's what's happening now. And as the marketplaces come to fruition, all these creators that are making things are going to put them back into the system, and others are going to then build on them and then put that back into the system, and it's exponential.
Yep. On that. Let me give you guys some insight on that, because this is another thing that's being democratized. You know, it used to be that you have to hire a graphic designer to build you something. There's a cost component to that, quite frankly, because someone like Michael Potts is a world-class expert at this stuff. I mean, he's the guy I bring in to build. I mean, he and I work on a lot of Fortune 500 company projects where we build really amazing spaces. It's expensive because he's using ProMax software. It's a professional, you know, thing. Not relatively expensive, keep in mind, okay? The thing you got to keep in mind is this. Just like clip art, remember back in the early 90s when you couldn't get a lot of images, and now you can get any clip art you possibly could want just by doing a search on Google Images or on clip art sites. Turbo Squid and other sites, there's huge marketplaces for digital objects now. And so if you wanted to buy a Ferrari and put it in there for 20 bucks, you can get a beautiful Ferrari that some graphic designer made in Australia and put out on a shared site that you can go get it. Lots of free software too, like free clip art. Now you still want to bring in like a Michael Potts in his studio when you have a serious thing to do, like you're Dan Swift and you're doing residential architecture designs, and it's really important to get it exactly right and it's completely custom. Mm-hmm. But you know, if you guys call me and we work together, I try to help you sort out like stuff to recommend we bring Michael Potts in because it's a heavier lift, to stuff that we know we can create just by pulling objects off the internet. And then of course, any object you can create in PowerPoint, you can pull in there as well. So you guys can create a lot of content.
And by the way,
has really been out evangelizing the idea of this spatial web for 5 years. But it wasn't about spatial web at the core. Spatial web is a manifestation of the key elements that need to come together to create this experience. The most core element is identity. Identity is the idea that you own your own data. It's not distributed where you have to ask permission or people can exploit it, but you have access to it, and you can have fine-grained permissions for who can use it and how. And so as you get into these worlds, that identity piece is going to be critical to healthcare, because you come in with an amalgam of all your healthcare data, and you can share it with whoever wants to. And if you're having an interaction with a doctor, for instance, you can give them permission to assemble the right data the right way. And so, really, all the pieces are there to have an interaction with the information and to look at it and to analyze it and to have AI support diagnoses and what have you. But to actually get the information securely, that's still a challenge, and that's one of the areas we're working.
Also, I talked to some HIPAA lawyers on this. Also, Jonathan Vischer, who is one of the A360 members that did the wealth management, he had a lot of these concerns because he's got regulatory frameworks around what financial data you share and stuff. Right now, my understanding is that just like putting stuff on a Google shared drive and the laws governing putting stuff on a Google shared drive or a lockbox is the same in this environment if it shows that it has a similar lockbox feature. It's just a virtual way to see something that's on a shared drive, right? So the way that the legal profession and HIPAA and regulatory frameworks are looking at this, with one lawyer I spoke to, was they're using the same precedence that's been set when they do audits of systems to see if they're validated, like the way we share things and the whole learning we went through the last decade on putting confidential information, sensitive personal information on drives like Google Drive. It's just a visual representation. But because, my day job, I'm at Bain Consulting, right? An executive there. The work I'm doing with the A360 community is outside of Bain. I'm doing that independently. But I'm using it all the time in management workshops it's the lowest hanging fruit. It's the cheapest option too. You can get headsets for everybody and automatically get in there. Now think about this. You guys didn't experience in the space yet, but you'll learn this. You can add objects, you can add sticky notes, you can have 5 screens up running. So when you leave the room, you save it. So it becomes a project team room. And anything you do in there gets saved. As I mentioned, eventually these rooms will be recorded so people who missed the meeting can go in and actually live it in reverse, go back in time and live it. But one of the things I do is I take these frameworks, like that innovation framework I showed you earlier in the presentation. You can take an image like that right out of PowerPoint, put it as an object up on the wall the size of a movie screen, and then you can ask the people that just did an exercise with you, everyone create a sticky note, make the sticky note green or red or yellow, and green means good, yellow means bad, and go put it up on top of this framework to indicate your priorities, what you liked, what you didn't like. I mean, there's so many ways to create a data visualization in real time where people actually are creating that data visualization by doing things naturally, like moving around and putting sticky notes on the framework. So absolutely, you'll find some tremendous productivity gains to the point where, David, if you and I could have a meeting, we could give everyone together in the same room, we probably would say, let's all put on our headsets because we have superpowers that we can do in this environment that make us more productive.
Well, I showed you that I'd add to it is that because it can be democratized so fast, literally there is nobody that doesn't understand what a URL is today, that is in your potential audience, group. So when you tell somebody, you need to get an Oculus, you need to do this, that's great, but it's going to be a minority. So if you can have a capability where you just say, here's the URL, doesn't matter what device you're on, click on it. If you're on a phone, go in. If you're on an iPad, go in. If you're on Windows, if you're on a MacBook Pro, if you're on an Oculus, come on in with the Oculus. That's the key. And the other key to something like that is you have to decide, avatars are not right for everyone. Avatars are incredible. And I think Spatial.io did an unbelievable job with in fact, I think they're the best. But when you have different types of interactions, there's something about video that still captures more of the human. And when you're having interactions between people who are trying to develop relationships over a period of time, accessibility, usability, and the human factor are critical. So to run that out at scale and then to introduce other devices like Oculus in full immersion, I think is the right move. In fact, I think it's the only move if you want to move fast and you want to get scale.